On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk about DNS and HTTPS, plus are web scrapers illegally stealing your data from services like LinkedIn? Well, it sounds like the court doesn't think so. Plus, Brian McHenry, Curtis, and I talk with Anthony James, VP of Product Marketing at Infoblox, about network visibility, infrastructure, and security. Twyat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 359, recorded September 13th, 2019. The Leaning Tower of DNS. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Thinking about moving your data storage to the cloud? Wasabi is enterprise-class cloud storage at 1/5 the price of Amazon S3 and up to 6 times faster with no hidden fees for egress or API requests. Calculate your savings and try Wasabi with free unlimited storage for a month at wasabi.com, code ENTERPRISE. And by NetScout. Meeting the digital demands of today starts with a bold new IT strategy. NetScout is delivering a new perspective, visibility without borders, to guide your digital success and data center transformation. Get seamless visibility and monitoring for performance and security. See how at netscout.com. Welcome to Twyat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Louis Moreski, your guide through this big, giant world of the enterprise, but I definitely can't guide you by myself. I need to bring in the professionals, the experts in the industry, starting with our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. Curtis, always great to see you. Any more storms rolling in your area?
Well, there was one that we were worried about, but it seems like it's just going to sort of peter out and crawl up the coast. So another week without a storm here in Florida, we'll take it.
That's like, well, it's always great to have you here. And you know what? We might as well bring in, we love to talk about security on this show. And you know what? Why don't we go ahead and bring in our friendly neighborhood security expert, Mr. Brian McHenry, Director of Global Security Solution Architect at F5. Bam, it's great to have you back, man.
It's always good to be back, Lou. It's been too long.
Yeah, what's been keeping you busy?
Well, we are right in the throes of our NGINX acquisition. As always, this is a recurring theme every time I come back. But for me right now, I'm looking just over the event horizon. F5's big sales kickoff is in November, and I'm planning all of our security and technical sales curriculum so that we can help all of our people out in the field help our customers be successful in implementing security solutions.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. Well, speaking of looking forward to it, we have a great show today. We have a jam-packed show today. Now we're going to talk about the love-hate relationship between web page scrapers, but we also talk about how community projects are highlighting the need for security volunteers. Now, we also have a great guest, Anthony James, from Infoblox, to talk about network infrastructure and security. But before we get into all of that goodness, we're going to go ahead and do this week's Blips. Now, consumers are starting to wonder whether they can trust mobile app stores or not. Now, it's another week and another batch of Android apps actually made their way to the Google Play Store that embed malware into themselves. Now, dubbed the Joker, is designed to silently sign in users and sign them up for subscription services, something they may not even notice they did unless they actually diligently check their monthly credit card statements. Now, how does it do it? Well, it automates the necessary interaction with the premium offers webpage, enters the operator's offer code, and then waits for the SMS message with a confirmation code and extracts it using regular expressions. Now, finally, the Joker submits the extracted code to the offer's webpage in order to authorize the premium subscription. Now, I stopped using SourceForge years ago because of this type of stuff, so it seems that Google better do something soon because the enterprise usually doesn't tolerate this kind of consistent negligence in the space. Now, however, Google has removed the apps that embedded this malware, but not before they racked up a total of 472,000 downloads. Now, there is a laundry list of apps that has had this embedded, so go ahead and check out the list to see if you're vulnerable. But if you do have these apps, You might want to also second check your Google Play account for any rogue subscriptions, because otherwise you might be surprised to find your family members get into Korean dramas like Vicky.
Well, so much for law and order. Indictments are doing very little to stop an Iranian group from new attacks on universities. Cobalt Dickens, a threat group that the U.S. has accused of working on behalf of the Iranian government, has launched a large global phishing campaign aimed at students, faculty, and staff at dozens of universities. The goal, as with the group's previous campaigns, appears to be to steal research data and other academic resources. Now, the U.S. government indicted 9 members of the group in March 2018 on charges related to the theft of some 31 terabytes of academic data and intellectual property from universities, businesses, governments, and non-governmental organizations. There have also been multiple takedown attempts and public disclosures of the threat actors' activities. Even so, there's no sign that Cobalt Dickens has stopped or even slowed its attacks. According to SecureWorks, the latest wave of phishing emails was sent to targets in over 60 universities across the U.S., Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. The messages purport to be about some library-related matter, such as an account expiring because of inactivity, and contain links to pages that are spoofed to look exactly like the login page of that specific university. Well, so far, Cobalt Dickens has targeted some 380 universities in 30 countries in its phishing campaigns. The group's continued attacks, despite the indictments and public exposure of its tactics and techniques, are an indication of just how difficult it can be to stop an advanced threat group.
We all know that well-known cybersecurity company Sophos. They used to be a sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech as well, but this week they actually open sourced a fantastic project ahead of Microsoft's variant of something very similar. Now, the Sandboxy project is a Windows utility that lets users run any application inside a secure sandbox. Now, Microsoft announced back in January it would be adding a similar feature to Windows 10 to date. It actually showed up in Build 1903 as the dubbed Windows Sandbox. Now, however, Sandboxy has a huge following, but it used to only be available under commercial license. Now, this past week, Sophos made the app a free download and claimed it intends to publish its source code under an open source license in the coming future. Now, this could be a move to reduce cost to maintain that project and not actually go up against Microsoft's variant, but we have seen open source projects like these flourish in the past when they hit GitHub. Now, Sandboxy is a limited container where an app can run separate from the rest of the operating system and apps around it. Now, sandboxes are a really efficient way for constraining malicious code so it can't reach sensitive parts of the user's computer. If you're an organization looking to actually test this type of software or services or apps on your machine, you might want to start testing with Sandboxy.
Well, my last news piece makes this one just a little bit less impressive, but 281 people have been arrested in an international business email compromise takedown. A coordinated law enforcement operation targeting business email compromise, or BEC, has led to the arrest of 281 individuals around the world, including 74 in the United States, 167 in Nigeria, 18 in Turkey, and 15 in Ghana, according to the Department of Justice. Alleged fraudsters were also arrested in France, Italy, Japan, Kenya, Malaysia, and the United Kingdom. Operation Rewired was a 4-month effort by the U.S. DOJ, Department of Homeland Security, Department of the Treasury, Postal Inspection Service, and Department of State. The operation resulted in the seizure of nearly $3.7 million, the DOJ reported, because in addition to corporate and individual finances, fraudsters may be targeting personally identifiable information or employee tax records so they can file fake returns or sell stolen data online. That was the case here. In investigating this massive identity theft and tax fraud scheme, law enforcement discovered conspirators stole more than 250,000 identities and filed more than 10,000 fraudulent tax returns, attempting to generate more than $91 million in refunds. In a disclosure published the same day as the Operation Rewired announcement, the FBI reported a 100% increase in identified global exposed losses related to BEC between May 2018 and July 2019. Between June 2016 and July 2019, there were 166,349 domestic and international cases of BEC. These generated, get ready for it, $26.2 billion in total exposed monetary losses. This increase in the number of incidents is partly attributed to greater awareness and reporting of BEC scams, which have been reported in all 50 states and 177 countries around the world.
In news sure to pique the interest of our guests this week, a new variant of CyXBot, malware configured for the theft of information in cryptocurrency, has been spotted in the wild, which abuses Google's DNS over HTTPS service. DNS is frequently an easy egress point as many types of malware and other data theft tools. HTTPS encryption is another common method for smuggling data out of home and corporate networks, where visibility to the encrypted traffic is often limited for anti-malware, intrusion prevention, next-gen firewalls, and other security inspection systems. DNS over HTTPS compounds these two issues by combining encryption with the poorly monitored outbound DNS traffic. The malware, delivered through spam campaigns such as a payload in the Splevo and RigV exploit kits, targets users as long as they are not Russian language speakers. If a machine is deemed suitable for infection, malware modules are executed, including a password stealer, a cookie stealer, keylogger, and a process that monitors the clipboard for credentials used for wallets of cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, and Ripple. CyXBot is also able to grab information from the victim's email address, covertly delete any traces of malicious emails sent, and remove itself from an infected system. By using Google's DOH service, it allows attackers to hide the DNS query to the CNC domain or command and control domain behind the HTTPS, according to Proofpoint. Unless SSL or TLS is being inspected by a man-in-the-middle system, DNS queries to this CNC server will go unnoticed. It is strongly recommended to implement outbound DNS inspection and TLS protocol decryption tools in the edge of your enterprise network as a countermeasure for detecting this type of malware activity.
Now, Let's Encrypt has had a significant impact on the internet by allowing pages who couldn't usually afford to secure their sites with TLS encryption can now do so for free. In fact, there's stats showing that almost 80% or more of page loads these days are actually encrypted with Let's Encrypt. But there's still tons of other hurdles we have to get over in order to plug those holes in the internet infrastructure, like DNS. Now, the system that looks up your site's IP address when the type of site's name and when you actually type your site's name into a browser, it remains unprotected by encryption. Now, this means that anyone along the path from your internet to your DNS resolver can actually collect information about which sites you visit. Now, this means that even eavesdroppers can still profile your online activity and make a list of sites you visited or a list of who visits a particular site. Now, malicious DNS resolvers or on-path routers can also tamper with your DNS request, blocking you from accessing sites or even routing you to fake versions of the site you requested. Now, you're probably remembering the discussion we had way back about DNS over HTTPS and how Google plans to test DNS over HTTPS in its Chrome 788 Canary builds. Now, along with technologies like TLS 1.3 and encrypted SNI, actually will help with privacy issues, but there's still some major hurdles to get over. Now, for instance, many internet service providers and participants in the standardization process have expressed strong concerns about the development of the protocol. ISPs are also concerned that DOH will complicate the use of captive portals. Now, some countries like the UK use DNS to police what sites people can surf, and this can actually cripple their efforts. Now, members of civil society have also expressed concerns over plans for browsers to automatically use specific DNS resolvers, overriding the resolver configured by the operating system. Now, for this movement to work, DOH must focus on the rights of the user. In fact, browsers must be transparent about who will gain access to DNS request data and give users an opportunity to choose their own resolver. Now, ISPs and other operators of public light should implement support for encrypted DNS to help preserve a decentralized system in which users have more choices of whom they rely on for various services. So basically, we're saying that there is a long road ahead, and you better be ready for a DOH marathon rather than a sprint. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get there, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Now, Jeff Flowers and David Friend actually founded Carbonite, and they patented a revolutionary way of storing data on disks. It lays data on disks sequentially as opposed to in blocks, and it makes it really fast. Now, with the advent of Wasabi, they're now disrupting cloud storage as well. Now, it really is awesome. It's fast, it's secure, it's inexpensive. And you might be thinking, I could use cloud storage, and the more I store in it, the more I access it or perform operations on it, the more I get charged. Well, in this day and age, that's really the story for most cloud storage companies, but most cloud storage providers are competing to see how low they can go on storage fees and ingress and egress fees. Well, Wasabi has a solution for all of this. Now, from experience, I can tell you if you go cheaper on cloud storage, sometimes you also give up on performance and reliability. Wasabi Cloud Storage has ways to fix all of these issues. Now, if you are doing small personal projects all the way up to large enterprise ones, Wasabi has figured it all out. Now, listen to the cost of the service. Pricing is $0.0059 per gigabyte per month, or $5.99 per terabyte per month. It's really easy to calculate your costs and savings here. And listen to this game changer. Unlimited egress for your data and no charge for API calls, so you don't actually have to pay to access your data. Think about that. Now, check out what you're already paying for cloud storage, because I can tell you, not having to include those egress fees and API calls for those CRUD operations will really save you some coin. I'll tell you that. Now, you're probably thinking, well, if they're cheaper, they must be slower, or they don't have all the bells and whistles. Well, with Wasabi, they are able to tackle all that. With Wasabi's disruptive technology, it makes their storage 80% cheaper and 6 times faster in speed than industry leaders. Is your organization worried about compliance? Well, Wasabi's got HIPAA, FINRA, and CJS compliance as well. Now, think about this. Now, fast, cheap storage isn't worth much if your data isn't secure. Well, Wasabi has an answer. They offer a unique feature called immutable buckets that really allows that you cannot delete or alter and protects your data and valuable data from accidental or malicious destruction. Plus, see if you can find a service like that does that nowadays. Now, plus they also offer 90-day rotating integrity checks and 11 nines of durability. Now, are you worried about data migration? Well, Wasabi also has an answer for that as well. They have the Wasabi Bulk Transfer Appliance. This thing is powered by Netgear, and it's designed to transfer huge amounts of data while dramatically reducing your costs. Now, if you might be already using cloud storage right now, but your organization maybe even tried to save data on-premise to save costs, but I think Wasabi might have you rethinking those approaches. Data storage is all that Wasabi does. They are the experts. It's their passion. They believe that in the world of rapidly escalating cloud storage needs, that progress depends on cloud storage being more like a utility with fast, affordable storage available in endless supply. Now, I bet you want to try this out right now. Go build something fun or move some of your data right now. They truly understand the needs of enterprises, so they don't have things like egress fees. Calculate savings for yourself and start a free trial of unlimited storage for a month. Go to wasabi.com, click the free trial link, and enter the code Enterprise. Join the movement and migrate your data to the cloud with confidence. Go to wasabi.com and make sure to use the offer code Enterprise. And we thank Wasabi for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's now time for the bites, and today we have a pretty good one. Now, tons of services do it. You may think, well, hey, I use Google. They index sites worldwide. They crawl the web, analyze the content of it, index it, and then serve it back to you as contextual search results. Sounds about right? Sounds great, right? Well, let's flip the coin now a little bit here. There are actually a ton of services out there that actually maliciously use web scraping in a less than ideal or ethical way. Like, for instance, profiling you. Now, you ever post an address or an email or a birthday or a bio anywhere? Well, services want that data so they can aggregate it together, profile you, and then sell it to the highest paying organization. Now, some companies are fighting back. They actually want retribution here, and some of them are saying, hey, the content on my site is actually copyrighted or it's proprietary to my service. In fact, they even use the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act as a baseline for their sites. Now, are companies who scrape websites, are they really violating this act? Well, according to a court appeal this past week, they aren't. Now, the ruling comes in a legal battle between Microsoft-owned LinkedIn against a small data analytics company called HiQ Lab. Now, HiQ scrapes data from the public profiles of LinkedIn users, then uses the data to help companies better understand their own workforce. Now, according to a judge, the CFAA was enacted to prevent intentional intrusion on someone else's computer, specifically computer hacking. Now, the ruling means that the CFAA only applies to information or computer systems that were private to start with, something data websites owners typically signal with a password requirement or a registration. Now, however, Monday's ruling goes beyond finding that HighQ hasn't violated anti-hacking laws. In fact, the appeals court also upheld a lower court order banning LinkedIn from interfering with HighQ's scraping activities during the course of the litigation. This is a huge ruling, especially for services like HighQ. And I want to start first with the ruling. Bam, I want you to, I'll throw it over to you first. Now, is this opening the door to more services that are even less enterprise focused and starting to scrape information about you, your organization, and maybe even commoditize on it?
Well, I think it opens a huge hole in our ability to protect ourselves from automated attacks, right? So it creates a loophole, if you will, in what exactly is hacking. Because look at, for example, the retail industry is a great example. Their data that's most valuable is often their pricing data, right? Whether it's buying an airline ticket, the latest pair of sneakers. They're two high-profile examples of things that are hit heavy with bots. So this isn't, these sites aren't being breached per se, right? They're just, people are simply automating, either scraping of fare data to have a lower, be able to compare and get the latest, go to a travel aggregator site and find the lowest fare on a flight, or I'm going to go and buy these sneakers with an automated thing as soon as they launch at 10 a.m. on Saturday on Nike's site, for example. And what that does for Nike or for an airline or say Ticketmaster is it creates this artificial volume on their site, right? So first of all, they're not being intruded, but they have to scale to keep up with this type of traffic. And that also creates a bad customer experience for their legitimate users, right? So we've all been through CAPTCHA forms and clicking "I'm not a robot" and all those types of things as countermeasures. This ruling could potentially say, hey, you no longer can use CAPTCHA to keep bots out of your site as long as they're not trying to hack you. So but I don't know of a way to really, this is an area I spend a lot of time in. I don't know a way that you can really clearly define that line of checking whether it's human or not before you get their intent, right? You want to be able to determine the humanness of it at end user before you allow their intent. So I see this potentially being, bleeding over into other areas where they're saying you can't interfere with someone's automated scraping of your site.
It makes sense. I mean, the whole concept of semantic web nowadays is like, hey, I provide even semantic clues within the metadata of my site so that search engines and other services can actually get some information out of the site. And then you go and add the content of the site, which is actually really valuable. That could be very useful to services like that. Like you even said, shopping. There's lots of other services out there. Curtis, what do you think? I mean, does this open the door to more and more abuse of this, or is it actually open the door to more useful services?
I think, as in most things with the internet, the answer is yes. Because I think this does keep the possibility there for some very useful services. And of course, there are going to be people who misuse it for bad purposes. To me, one of the important things about this, well, we'll call them two important things. One is that this was, in fact, looking at publicly available data, things that the users themselves had flagged as publicly available. There was no attempt by the service to keep it private. There was no expectation of privacy on the part of the customers. The other thing is sort of intrinsic to the notion of the technique they were using with screen scraping. You and I both know that once something comes across, if it has been rendered through HTML, it has to be displayed on my system. And once it's on my system, if I scrape it, then am I really breaking into someone else's system to get the data? And I think that is probably going to come up somewhere in the court case. Now, if they've been using some sort of API and grabbing it straight off a server, that's a different point. But this was screen scraping. So I think there are those 2 points. Once you render something on your system, I think it becomes something that you can scrape and deal with. And if the user has no expectation of privacy and in fact has explicitly given up the privacy so that it can be displayed globally, I think they're going to have trouble calling the capture of that information as hacking.
Right. Now I want to throw this back to you. I'm going to throw a scenario to you now. The interesting scenario here is, let's say, even services like this, they go create an account on LinkedIn, and now they have access to all LinkedIn's data. It's a valid account. It's, some user they go create, and now the users within the system, they don't have a reasonable sense of privacy there, because they say, hey, if you're a user of LinkedIn, you'll have access to all of my profile information, my history, so on, especially for recruiting and so on. Now, do you think that this kind of goes against some of the rulings here, or is this still viable?
Well, I think it's viable. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, hey, this data is public. My user, the user of the system has defined it as public. So I think calling this hacking per se, LinkedIn's case is not very strong. Where I do have some concern, right, is this secondary ruling, once again, is we're saying LinkedIn can't interfere. So does that mean LinkedIn can't throttle their traffic, identify them, throttle them, and prevent them from consuming or over-consuming resources that a typical user would use? Because this is the type of stuff that one of the CIA triad of security, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which that last one, which I'm really focusing on here, is being able to throttle this type of traffic and identify it, and maybe quarantine it in a way that it doesn't overrun resources, is something that should be allowed for fair use. So again, I think the legal system is struggling to understand how technology works. And this is a challenge. I think the other thing that's under the covers in this scenario too is that there was no pre-existing defined agreement between HighQ and LinkedIn, right? So HighQ had been behaving in this way for many, many years. This was their business model, and LinkedIn, before they had a competitive service, didn't really care too much. So there's a little bit of a disingenuousness here. But I'm concerned about this as a high court ruling saying that this isn't hacking really, and in fact you can't interfere with someone accessing your resources, whether they're public or not. I think interference needs to be really clearly defined in this case, right? We need to be able to say I need to be able to interfere to the extent that I can at least preserve the integrity of my data, be able to preserve. And I think integrity is covered under hacking, but also preserve the availability, right? Hacking can be denial of service, right? We can certainly classify it that way. So we've got to be, I think, clearer in the definition here so that we can march forward and really take care of our networks and infrastructure.
No, we do have to move on to the next part, but Kurt, I want to throw it over to you first, because I noticed that you got excited when I asked that question about, hey, if they create that account, are they actually allowed to do that? Now, services have service level agreements. They have EULAs. They have service agreements when you sign up for them. Is this a way to restrict these types of services?
I think it very well may be, because if they created an account, then they had to explicitly or implicitly agree to the terms of use. And it may well be that this sort of behavior is restricted under the terms of use, and I would be willing to bet if it's not now, it will be shortly. And that contractual agreement would govern the interaction. If, on the other hand, they're just doing some sort of Google search, it pops up and they're able to see it without having a membership in LinkedIn, then I think their case becomes much stronger. Because if it's out there for literally anyone to see, it's hard to understand where the privacy claim comes in. Well, As Lou said, it's a great area of interest. I'm sure the whole privacy thing and screen scraping will come up again. But right now, it's time to move on to our next bite. We're going to talk about community projects highlighting the need for security volunteers. In 2008, the Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech, kicked off a course to give computer science students experience in creating applications and software for communities that might not otherwise have the resources to purchase technology. Known as Computing for Good, the course produced some early successes, like the Vein to Vein project created, which done in collaboration with the Centers for Disease Control. It made an open source blood safety management system for clinics in Africa that could electronically track information related to specific blood samples. The Basic Laboratory Information System, or BLIS project, worked with the CDC and several nations' ministries of health to create a system to help medical and hospital labs manage tests and specimens. Now, there have been a lot of examples for this, and a decade later, many of these systems are still in use in some form, which is an absolute testament to both the need for the projects and the quality of the results. Get to it. At the same time, the success and longevity of the projects also put them at risk because attackers are searching for vulnerable systems, and bespoke projects like this are absolutely on their radar. For example, on September 10th, Rapid7, which is a vulnerability management firm, disclosed 3 vulnerabilities it had found in the BLIS system, or the BLIS system, during a pen test. These vulnerabilities could have allowed an attacker to gain information on the system's users, give an existing user administrator privileges, and then change the user's password, which would effectively get admin access to a BLIS system. Now, these systems are deployed in almost 36 facilities in Africa, so an attacker would have the ability to impinge on a very important healthcare function, collecting and maintaining data on blood samples, bodily fluid samples, and other biological samples, and the testing of those samples in medical labs. So in this case, a maintainer was able to respond quickly to Rapid7. Developers had already identified the issues, and now they've released an update and a patch. So there are a lot of these where you have projects that move forward, that may create great code, may solve real problems, but what happens when they are done, for example, in the guise of an academic project? One of the pieces of academic projects is that if they're done by students, those students move on, and they may or may not have the interest and ability to continue supporting those projects in their later non-collegiate life. Now, these issues are getting bigger and more critical as systems like this are moving from local installs and on-prem installs to internet-connected services and the cloud. For example, BLIS is undergoing a series of updates to make it ready to become an internet-connected service. So what kind of services can be put in place to maintain the security of these very critical things? Georgia Tech has put a focus on security and privacy through the Patch Reward program. It pays security researchers and developers up to $20,000 to find vulnerabilities and provide a patch. GitHub, now owned by Microsoft, offers anyone the ability to sponsor an open source projects, and there are others like Open Collective, Tidelift, and Community Bridge. Most of these, however, have been aimed at large, well-known, and foundational open source efforts. As is true all over open source, smaller community projects have far fewer resources, and they may need security professionals to join with the software dev professionals who create the projects. So what is the need for security pros to join in with this? And is it tied to an ethical or just a humanitarian need for software development professionals to continue to devote their effort and their time to projects like this. Lou, I want to turn to you first. Is this something that you have any experience with, or that a large software company, such as, say, just to pick one as an example, Microsoft, might have a hand in helping by encouraging their employees or providing some infrastructure for the projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously it's funny because we're at the part this week is called the Giving Campaign started. And a lot of, employees, they go out and they volunteer their time and their expertise in areas like this. And they help promote very similar kind of projects like this. And I've actually seen it before. And of course, Microsoft itself also promotes these types of projects and these types of secure services across the board. Obviously, you got foundations, like obviously Gate Foundation is one of those that they make sure that security and privacy is very important to them. And of course, companies like Microsoft help out with that. So I do think that companies like Microsoft, like the secure companies out there today, the ones that find privacy and security very important, they should share the knowledge. They should share the knowledge. They should share the technology. They should share the best practices. The best ways to benefit from all of the knowledge and services that are out there is by sharing. And I think, it's kind of the responsibility of these companies that have done the research that are now marketing these capabilities across the board to also help those who might not be able to afford it, or even might need assistance or volunteering to help it out. So I definitely think it's important, and I definitely think the organization should continue doing it.
Well, Brian, I want to turn to you because I know that in addition to basic development of the application software, a lot of these organizations need help with the networking aspect, need help, as we pointed out in this article, with the security aspect. Have you seen any move to bring in network engineers and security pros for these nonprofit organizations who need some sort of application or even some sort of basic computing infrastructure stood up to support their activity?
Yeah, well, I've definitely seen some pockets of that type of activity where you see, somebody that's very savvy, say in a church community, decide to volunteer their services to stand up a website and add, offer, their ability to, secure that website, lock down a WordPress instance. So there's definitely a lot of that kind of behavior happening on a very local level, where the community-minded network engineer, security engineer, volunteering their services to help people, have internet presence, have Wi-Fi networks that are not trivially hacked. So things like that definitely are happening, on a local level, outside the limelight. And it's something that needs to continue to happen. Where it comes to things like this, where it's code that gets stood up and starts getting used by somebody that then doesn't have anybody to maintain it. These are harder skills to come by, and probably something where we need to develop open, something like open source communities that are willing to gather together and support things that are widely used by nonprofit and sort of thinly budgeted organizations like a church or like a community organization. So yeah, this is because as sort of the internet and the table stakes of having some sort of internet infrastructure for every organization is sort of like having lights on and air conditioning. We talk a lot about the shortage of skills and shortage of talent available to large enterprises, but I think we are starting to see that these same skill shortages are actually even more painful at these very small scale type of organizations. So it's not just the enterprise feeling the pain of skill shortage and not being able to afford talent. It's down here at this level too.
It is at a lot of different size levels, both of the organization and the communities they serve. I know I try to help out when I can. We have other members of the Twyat team, like our own Heather Williams, who works with emergency networking services to provide critical internet connectivity after natural and human-made disasters. I'm going to encourage all of the listeners of Twyat to go out and find someone in your community with an organization that needs some help, because there are nonprofits and different organizations doing good all over the place. They could use some help. It's a great way to give back just a little bit. Well, with that, it's time to give back our time and toss it back to our own Louis Maresca to take us into the rest of this episode of Twyat.
Thanks, Kurt. Well, before we get to my favorite part of the show, where we get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the Twyat Ride, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's NetScout. Now, digital transformations are hard, right? Well, it's also hard to increase the speed of innovation and really have operational agility. Well, why? Because organizations really have to spend time and energy on other things, like to meet the demands of today's digital world. The industry needs something disruptive to get organizations over IT hurdles so they can focus on scaling their business. Now, as the pace of change continues exponentially, as you know, so does the risk of failure. Now, it raises the stakes, especially for CIOs, architects, and IT operations. Now, NetScout has a different approach on it, one that has built for the era of digital and data center transformation. It's called Visibility Without Borders. Now, this is real-time visibility extending to wherever your technology infrastructure and business applications reside. Now, IT teams can benefit greatly from network monitoring software. If a network crashes or varies even a bit, the network or IT administrator is alerted. These are amazing tools. They give deep visibility for IT admins so your organization can understand the network and even its performance. You might have had like endpoint application perf monitors before. Well, this is similar functionality, and the data provided for you is for the entire network. If you are ready to get your network control back so you can start focusing on other parts of your business, NetScout is it. Now, as the world leader in transforming packet data, NetScout's smart data delivers high resolution and continuous monitoring across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Already in use, monitoring and securing some of the world's most critical commercial and public service infrastructures, NetScout's next generation level of visibility provides the holistic perspective that IT teams are seeking. See more at netscout.com. That is NetScout, NetScout.com. And we thank NetScout for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's now my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the Twyat Ride. And today we have Anthony James, VP of Product Marketing at Infoblox. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lou. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we get into the topic at hand, our audience loves to hear origin stories and people's journey through tech. Maybe you can take us on your journey and how you actually ended up at Infoblox.
Happy to. I'll keep it short. It's unfortunately a long history, but started out in Sydney, Australia in technical development and then helping customers build solutions. Fast forward to the late 90s, I moved to the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, the heart of tech. And kind of progressed through a litany of cybersecurity companies. I ran products at a company called Fortinet for about 6 years, took them public. Went over to a company called Blue Coat. Then I was over at FireEye running products there. And then I ran the gauntlet in cybersecurity companies, probably about 8 cyber companies covering everything from security orchestration to deception to cloud access security broker or CASB. And now I'm at Infoblox.
Fantastic. Now, I think it's safe to say you're pretty versed in security then, right?
Yeah, about 20 years back when it was boring, and now it's headline news everywhere.
Right on. Well, let's state the obvious first. I know that a lot of organizations, ITs, admins, and IT organizations, they understand DNS, DHCP, IP address management. But we have a lot of IT professionals in the audience that are always trying to understand their landscape. What's coming next? How do I scale my network infrastructure? Can you maybe take us through the current landscape? Like, what are challenges that organizations are running into nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of hit on it with a couple of the previous segments. The whole digital transformation we see is just straining that whole monolithic approach that we used to build. I was part of building this back a long time ago, where we had corporate data centers, we put our applications in the center of the network, kind of everyone kind of hubbed and spoke into that infrastructure. And it was a very well, known entity to maintain, manage, kind of visibility, and like you say, simple foundational elements like DNS, DHCP, and IP address management were kind of fed from that central area. And I think what we're seeing now is this whole digital transformation, and a lot of people say, well, what does that mean? It's another buzzword, but we see it everywhere. The whole idea of now transportation is an app. Oftentimes, food delivery is an app. We see things like 5G fueling augmented reality for medical and healthcare. What does that really mean? It means your network is really complex. It's no longer fueled by a central kind of data center. Now we're looking to the cloud to get faster and more agile experiences. We're looking to IoT to get devices that are specialized to give us better agility inside the infrastructure. And so what we're seeing and what our customers are experiencing is this decentralization, lack of a better term, and this borderless enterprise. There's so many connection points, it's really difficult to manage and control now.
Now, you kind of bring out a good point. I mean, obviously, you have a lot of organizations that are adding different endpoints all over the bit. You're having IoT devices. You're adding lots of different things to your network. Now, what is the solution here? Like, what do organizations do, especially ones that have even a hybrid type environment where they have on-premise and they have cloud solutions? What do they do? How do they manage this type of thing?
That's a great question. It's partly why I kind of joined Infoblox. I found this, I ran the gauntlet of all these different cybersecurity solutions, thinking that there was the next evolution of how to protect stuff, because it was getting diverse and getting complex. And, you need a solution for IoT, and you need a solution for branch office, and you need a solution that has this new protocol in it. What it really came down to is that exactly what you're pointing to is, how do you simplify this? When I talk to CISOs, often one of the biggest problems they have is the amount of projects. Not the how to secure their networks. They know how to do it. It's just the litany of projects. And what I found with Infoblox and why I'm here is this whole idea of, what if you took the network, the foundational pieces, this whole idea of DNS and DHCP and IP address management, and you made that a core foundational infrastructure that can also deliver on security. And so now you can not only manage all your assets. When something comes up online, like let's call it a rogue IoT device, it's there because you were the service that gave it an IP address, and now you can interrogate it, you can put that into an inventory, and now you can apply security on top, because if you don't want that device to go to a known bad location, your DNS can make that decision for you without having to wait further down the chain. So there's a bunch of things you can do from the foundation, I think, to make it simpler and broad scale without having to put, solution by solution, silo by silo.
It makes sense. Now, obviously, as you said, IT organizations are starting to move to more of a kind of distributed architecture instead of more of a centralized backhaul. Now, how does that, how does that help improve for users? How does it help complicate management for that type of thing too?
Yeah, it does exactly both of those things. So let's look at the user experience. Most of us as users are probably familiar with Office 365 or Google Apps. And so we're using those common services every day, probably more so than anything else. We're using email and we're using file sharing. And so if you think about that from a user experience, what is the most important thing is you want to have that experience where it's the fastest possible experience. You're not shoveling traffic around the world to get it to a central breakout point to the internet. And the way Microsoft and Google have delivered their platform is they have data centers that replicate the network in all these local regions. So the best experience for a user is your network connection, even if you're sitting in a branch office, is best served going directly to the internet, not back to a central office through some leased line and then back out through their core internet connection. That experience has to be changed. And so that really changes the network dynamics. And so the more we cloudify, if you will, the more we go to these cloud services, the more we want to change that network, and so that users have almost direct internet access from their branch or from their location. So that's the experience side of the equation. That's how we've got to move our networks, and that's how we see a lot of evolution today. What does that do? Is that complicates the management and the security of that. Just think about it from this point of view. If you had a centralized data center with a core set of IT services and IT staff, and that's where everything was funneled in and out of, you had complete visibility, complete manageability, and could layer security on top. If I take my branches now and say, look, I'm going to give them direct internet connectivity, yeah, they can also have connectivity back to their head office, but we're moving our apps out into these data centers like Google or like Microsoft Office or even to Amazon and so forth. Now that visibility is almost disappeared. You don't know if someone in the branch office is adding more devices because they're not backhauling everything to that central location. So now you've almost completely give yourself lack of visibility and manageability, and that also dovetails into security. How do you secure that branch if they're going directly to the internet? And of course, they're going to have a firewall. They obviously would do to do that connectivity. But that's, as we know, not enough. There needs to be more on top of that. So that's where the complexity starts to layer in on that environment.
Now, anytime you talk about a centralized location, people tend to think, okay, well, if I'm funneling all of my traffic into a centralized location, there has to be, at some point, a bottleneck, some kind of a scale issue at some perspective. Is this happening?
Right.
How is this handled?
So that's where I think you see this transitioning to decentralized. Yes, if you are, let's say you've got a bunch of branches all around the world, if they are funneling the traffic back to a central location for internet connectivity and those internet services, there will be performance issues. That's why we're seeing these local breakouts or direct to internet, however you want to term it. We're starting to see a lot of, and you might have heard the term SD-WAN or software-defined WAN, where traffic can be routed directly out of the branch to their closest data center for Microsoft or for Amazon. So you are starting to see this transformation of, we don't want to funnel everything back to the center of the network. We want to make it go directly to the application, but therein lies the issue of security and visibility and manageability.
Now, how does it make it easy for people to scale their network? Because obviously you're always adding new devices, new nodes to the network. How does it make it easy for that? Because now you have this kind of distributed system, and you need visibility and security for those types of things. How does it help here?
Yeah, so that's where we've obviously invested a lot in this area. I think as part of our 20-year heritage, we've been very focused on giving enterprises this centralized infrastructure manageability. We've been giving them the visibility and security on top of that, all centered around those foundational services that we mentioned. So as you break that apart, we've also embraced this idea of moving to these decentralized services with that foundation. So if you think about, I've got an enterprise with 20 branch locations scattered around the globe, and now those 20 locations have the option to go directly to the internet for their applications. The Infoblox can layer on top of that, and so you can start taking inventory of assets because you still are the one giving out the IP addresses as an Infoblox kind of distributed infrastructure, and you can still layer security on top because we've layered security on top of the DNS kind of infrastructure as well. So there are ways you can do it. You really have to look at it from what is the lowest common denominator that can cover the broadest amount of infrastructure and do it from a foundational level. Otherwise, you end up stacking on these solutions that are siloed and they don't interact. But we've come up with this platform, if you will. Blox One DDI is one of the platforms that is the ability to have DDI or DHCP, DNS, and IP address management at these distributed locations, but it all synchronizes up to one central cloud view for the customer. Layered on top of that would be this idea of Blox One Threat Defense, where you start funneling in threat intel on top of your DNS, which gives you back your control and your security. So we layer this, I term it like a blanket of foundational networking and security across that decentralized infrastructure for you.
Fantastic. Now, I do want to throw it over to my co-hosts because they have some questions about automation. Kurt.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm very interested because you're talking about doing performance conscious networking and visibility conscious networking at all of these related sites, you did mention the whole issue of software-defined networking, both on WANs and LANs. I think my question is, in order to do all of this, do you really get to the point where it forces networking automation to become part of the conversation? I mean, have we now reached a point where, in order to, in some ways, have this encompassing solution that a modern infrastructure requires, automation has to be part of that because it's simply too complex for human beings to keep a handle on?
That is a great question, Curtis. And I think we are. Think about it like this. We've seen the evolution of things like Amazon and virtualization and containerization of applications, not even going to this idea of software defined at this point. Let's just say your applications are highly virtualized. You could have 1,000 virtual servers sitting in an infrastructure or sitting in a cloud service. How do you manage those just IP addresses and just visibility and just knowing where things are and things move around? So that, from that point of view, automation has started to become more paramount now, because the amount of devices that we're adding to our networks is just exploding. And even if you think about, I laugh about it with a lot of my friends and colleagues, is how many devices do you have in your house? Even that's exploded. It used to be a few devices, and now it's tens, dozens, and sometimes hundreds in a single home. And I think the enterprises are experiencing that at a much more prolific way. So the whole network automation and visibility automation have to be combined so that you still have this feeling of a center of control or central control over everything, even if it is highly distributed. And the only way to do that is through automation.
As you're explaining all of this, I know that we're not only adding pieces to the stack, but we're increasing what we ask of each layer and each component within that stack. You hear various vendors talk about providing this additional service through DNS or that additional service through SSL. Basically trying to enrich existing protocols so that they don't have to add another one. And I guess my question is, in the balance between those, where do you come down? Do you worry about trying to add so much to an existing protocol that we make it topple over under its own weight, versus having so bloody many components in the stack that the housekeeping outweighs the house itself?
That's another great question, and that's partly why I kind of went back to Infoblox as a path for me, because I think that's the right path for a lot of enterprises. And what I mean by that is, you are completely right. When I looked at my career, I was adding another stack in every company I went to, another part of the stack. And if we look at DNS as an example, what was it built for? The simplification is, it's the yellow pages of the internet and your internal infrastructure. That's what it is. It's got a phone number, there's the IP address, and it's got a name. That's what you generally use to contact services. So the more we look at the stack, I think the more we have to think about how do we optimize what we have and not start throwing more pieces on top. And the way I think about that is, say DNS, for example. We've always looked at it as a very simplistic, very basic tool that is just a necessary thing. No one ever thought about what else could we do with it. And at Infoblox, we started looking at this challenge as that people are adding more security elements. They're adding threat intelligence platforms that is separate from everything else. What if you took threat intelligence and laid it on that DNS infrastructure? Well, now you're still doing the same DNS things. You're not changing the protocol. You're not changing the way it interoperates with the devices. You're not changing its behavior. But you can have it make a decision to say that if this DNS entry that someone is querying, which could be malware or ransomware, or someone's legitimately typing in a URL, is that destination valid? Is it a known malware serving site? Is it a known ransomware key delivery site? Is it an exploit site, or is it just a site that is passive? So I think if you look at that, we've taken that problem and said, where it makes sense, marry pieces of technology together and don't change the underlying foundation. So there is that point, and you made it very clearly. At some point, you're adding too much to the stack, and these protocols become overly heavy. You know, we're looking at, and this was brought up earlier in the segment, DNS over HTTP or DNS over TLS. Now, what is the value in that? Okay, we're going to secure that channel, but is that adding too much burden? And I think Lou said it best. That's going to be a journey. It's not going to happen as a sprint. It's going to be a long distance marathon. We'll have to see how that plays out, because we don't want to start for the sake of adding burden. I don't know if it's going to add more value or just make that a much more complex infrastructure to deploy.
Now, Bam, you're familiar with securing networks. Are organizations paying attention to the right layers of their network?
So that's a thing that keeps me up at night. You know, when we talk about as a security person, what are the things that make you really paranoid? And when I joined F5, my journey sounds a little bit similar to yours. I joined F5 as someone from a network background, familiar with securing networks, and I learned about all this stuff happening at the application layer, particularly HTTP. And so all our efforts to secure the network boundary are almost for naught against an attacker who's moved up the stack. I wonder why, you know, when I'm reading about even the blip that I read earlier today was about a malware that's taking advantage of DNS to shift data out of networks. And now that DNS over HTTPS is available, it's shifted its vector in that direction to become even harder to detect. Why aren't we in general in the InfoSec community talking more about inspecting DNS at that deep layer and seeing what's going on, not only in the protocol, but in the payload?
That is a fantastic question. And I'll tell you, from a 20-year veteran in cybersecurity, I was even before stateful firewalls were out, I was living that battle. I can tell you DNS did not come up. It was not something that we thought attackers are going to take advantage of, or we need to really secure it. Again, it seemed like this foundational thing that was just a need to have. And when you think about DNS, where does it normally live? A lot of people, if you're a home, novice and building your own networks, you're probably throwing it on your router or your firewall if you have one, or maybe even your Wi-Fi access point, and not thinking about it. You just DNS is DNS, right? And so we've seen that in at least the last 5+ years that adversaries are using this because no one's looking at it. The traditional network vendors, network security vendors, and I was a part of that whole evolution, didn't think that DNS would be a way for people to exploit and exfiltrate data. But lo and behold, the adversaries figure out these techniques and they look for soft spots, and that's been a solid soft spot for a long time because we were so focused. And I was part of that whole train of all of this traffic's going over HTTP and HTTPS. We've got to get inside the stream, we've got to look at the content, and we have to decrypt stuff that's encrypted and expose it and figure out what's going on, because that's the primary communication channel. And while we're looking to the left, the adversaries come from the right and say, oh, no one's looking at DNS. Let's make it look like a legitimate query. And let's just put some information behind that and have that, what we call low and slow attack. Let's have these queries continue to go out and reach their destination and reassemble. We certainly saw that. DNS has been in our blood for 20 years, and we saw that quite a number of years ago and said, we need to start putting, and we do have machine learning analytics that not just has threat intel on top of DNS, but we monitor the communications. That just happens to be that we're in DNS infrastructure. We have such an enormous presence in enterprise networks that we knew that this started to happen, and we looked for what can we do to detect and deter attacks riding over DNS. But I will tell you, back to the point, a lot of our SEs use this technique. They'll go into any infrastructure, unfortunately, and we have a tool and say, let's see if we can exfiltrate data over DNS. 100% hit rate, we can push data out of an enterprise network into it's a dormant site. It just shows that we can get data out. It doesn't do anything that's harmful. But we can prove that no matter what controls you have in place, none of those controls are looking at DNS because we just thought it was a utility.
Yeah, so maybe the real question is, as we evolve, DNS over HTTPS seems like, rather than DNS over TLS, so we should probably differentiate that for the audience a little bit, right? Yeah. We can take the standard DNS protocol, wrap it in TLS, or we can actually encapsulate DNS inside HTTPS. So it's two slightly different things. And it sounds like DOH is the one gaining the traction, and I would love to hear your take. How do we, in a massively distributed system that has to be available like DNS, right? DNS goes down, the switchboard operator is gone. We can't get where we need to go. We can't get anything done with DNS is offline. What's your take first on the trend of DNS over DOH versus DOT? I'll shorten it, and then secondarily, with these massively distributed systems like DNS that have to be up all the time, the availability is paramount. How do we decrypt? How do we deal with encryption at that kind of scale and need for availability? I mean, I'm going to ask you to get out a little bit ahead of the marathon that Lou mentioned, and put on your get out your crystal ball maybe.
You got it. So the first question, DOH is by far gaining the most traction. I agree with that. DOT is, I think, a little more difficult for a lot of people. Just encapsulating in HTTPS, well, all of our infrastructure typically supports HTTPS natively today, and our browsers are kind of all services are accessing it by default now. So that's kind of a I think the path forward. Now, when we talk about how do you start protecting from that, if we look at the long distance haul here and in the future, I kind of parallel it to what happened when HTTPS came about. I was in network infrastructure security at the time, and we were completely caught, not off guard, but blindsided a little bit that doing HTTP inspection was typical for an enterprise because we were sitting there at the border and we were providing the service connectivity for HTTP traffic, and now HTTPS comes along. Well, we kind of went down that path, and that's when you saw HTTPS inspection and that technology started to evolve. I see parallels here. I see kind of two ways that people will start to approach this, and on the enterprise we kind of have this approach that it's our traffic. For security purposes, we need to inspect it, even if it is encrypted. There are fine lines there. There are policies that different organizations take to say if it's private data and if it's public data, and how deep do you want to go, because there are certain things that you need to be cognizant of. But at the end of the day, the enterprise is all about protecting the brand and protecting the employees, the shareholders, and its overall business model. So letting DOH go untethered or unfeathered is kind of a problem. I think going forward, we'll start to see, not unlike the whole idea of HTTPS inspection, we'll see the ability, and we're trialing this with some of our customers, for the DNS platform to be the decider. Can you get to that DOH destination to allow DNS over HTTPS all the way through your entire network stack, or can you block that destination and have it fall back, which will be the way the mechanism works now? It'll fall back to a traditional DNS, and so there are ways that you can have a short circuit, but I think long term we'll see, not unlike web traffic and encrypted web traffic, we'll see inspection of that so that it'll service the queries correctly. And one of the things that I tell customers about is DNS is not just about the outside world. You also have services inside your infrastructure. And so if you kind of default to this whole DOH, then what are you doing for your internal services, your internet services, things that you might have on-prem that your internal employees need to get to if they're defaulting to an outside DNS server. So they're the things that I see moving forward.
Well, folks, we've been chatting with Anthony James, VP of Product Marketing at Infoblox. Anthony, thank you so much for being here. We're running a little bit low on time, but before we close up, maybe you can tell the folks at home where they can go to find out more about Infoblox and how can they get started.
You got it. Thanks for your time, Lou. And quickly, if you go to www.infoblox.com, you'll find a lot of information on what we call core foundational services, DDI, which stands for DNS, DHCP, and IP address management. Just simplifies your overall infrastructure if you're centralized or distributed. And then Blocks One Threat Defense is that second tier where we can layer on security that really gives you that best of both worlds. And it doesn't replace anything in your existing stack. It actually offloads a lot of the processing of security traffic from the existing stack and lets it focus on what it needs to do.
Well, folks, you've done it again. You sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 semantic web scrapers. But I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to my show co-hosts in crime, with whom I wouldn't want to do this show. I want to start with our very own Mr. Brian McHenry. Bam. Can you maybe tell the folks at home what you're up to, where they can find you online? What is F5 up to? How's NGINX going?
You can always find me on Twitter at BA McHenry. And if you want to hear a little bit more about what's going on with NGINX, NGINX Conf, which is a fun little play on the nginx.conf file. NGINX Conf is the conference. It just actually wrapped up in the past week, I believe. And if you didn't get to make it there, go head over to the nginx.com site. You'll be able to find all the keynotes get posted up there pretty shortly after the conference is over. So you'll be able to catch up on everything NGINX once the conference wraps up and they get a chance to post up all the keynotes and other goodies from the conference that for all the folks that couldn't make it in person.
Thanks, Bam. Well, we also thank our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, where can the folks find you and the catalog of all of your work?
Well, you can find most of my work these days over at the edge of dark reading. We are doing all sorts of interesting stuff over there, and I will point to it on my Twitter feed at KG4GWA. Now, one thing to note, this weekend I'll be taking part in a Makeathon to support hands-on STEM education and training here in Central Florida. I'll be tweeting about that. Also be doing that on my Instagram account, Kurt_Franklin. Check it out because we'll be doing live streaming. A bunch of talented and creative teams who are all given a box, an identical box of stuff, instructions on a theme. Then we work all weekend, and we have the judging on Sunday afternoon, including some guest judges who have done things like design products and props for Cirque du Soleil and other groups. So it should be a fun but exhausting weekend. Check it out, and let me know if you're a Twiat Riot member peeking over our shoulder.
Well, also thanks to you as well. You're the person who drops in each and every week to watch and listen to this show. To get your enterprise goodness, we want to make it easy for you to watch and listen and catch up on your enterprise goodness for each week. So go to our show page right now, twit.tv/Twiat. There you'll find all the amazing back episodes, plus all the show notes, the co-host information, guest information, and all the links to the stories we do during the show. But more importantly, next to the videos, you'll get those helpful subscribe and download links. Support the show by getting your audio version, your video version, your HD video version of your choice. In fact, you get to choose the format or even the service that you listen on. Now, it's the best way to stay on top of your enterprise and IT news. And you might as well subscribe to get it, right? Now, after you've subscribed, share the show with your friends and family and coworkers because we love doing this show. And if we have more subscribers, we can keep doing it. Now, of course, if we get to subscribe, you can also check out the show live each week, 1:30 p.m. Pacific on Fridays, live.twit.tv. And if you're going to watch the show live, you might as well jump into our chat room as well. We have a great chat room, bunch of characters in there, and they love to kind of ask questions and really direct the show. So if you want to check that out, go to irc.twit.tv. Now, don't forget, you can follow me as well at twitter.com/LouMM. There I get to post all the things that I do during my normal work week, as well as you can also check out dev.office.com to check out how the Office can make you more productive and how you can customize it to make it even more productive for your organization. I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support us each and every week doing This Week in Enterprise Tech. We couldn't do this show without them. Also, I want to thank everyone at Twit, especially the engineers. And also thank to our tireless producer, Mr. Brian Chi. Chibert is our tireless producer. He does all the bookings, the show notes, the plannings for the show. We couldn't do this without him, so thank you to him and all of his work. And of course, before we sign out, we have to thank our TD for today, Victor. Victor, you know the tradition here. What was the major topic of today's show?
Going back to your first blip, something I gotta check what apps I got installed on my phone. And have you been getting into Korean dramas?
No, I have not. But I think if anybody has, that's one of the services that's out there by Google Play. And if you never know, it might sign you up.
Oh, I thought we had something to talk about.
I would say that is a bust for this week, Victor. The show topic of this week was screen scrapers and network security, but you were very close, sir.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty close.
Yeah. Well, maybe next time. And until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.